Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul. Today on this bonus episode of the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome a special guest, my wife, Cheryl.
Hi.
Fire and Ice refers to our late April, early May 16-day cruise on Norwegian Spirit to the dual bucket list destinations of the Hawaiian Islands and Alaska. Cruise several months ago when I interviewed Professor Cruz, a leading cruise blogger and Alaska expert, for a feature I was writing about her in The Joy of Cruising Again. Professor Cruz, who also goes by Sarah, had just returned from the same cruise, and I was amazed that such a cruise existed, especially given that it contained two destinations that were on my bucket list. In fact, on episode 12, which aired a couple of days before we flew to Honolulu, I thought it would be fitting to have Sarah on the show. When Sarah first told me about the Fire and Ice cruise, I thought, what a wonderful way to check off two bucket list destinations in one trip. However, I knew that convincing my wife was not going to be easy. She's not quite as cruising addicted as I am, and this was a more costly cruise than what we typically spend. Not the most money we've spent on a cruise, but certainly significantly higher than our average cruise. So I figured perhaps we could do it in a couple of years. And then an opportunity presented itself. Cheryl, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here, and it's great to be back home.
So in January, we were flying home from another bucket list cruise, the Smooth Jazz Cruise on Celebrity Millennium. Of course, after a cruise, I'm always thinking about the next cruise. You know, research. So I say to Cheryl, where are we going to go next? She said, let's take a break from cruising. Let's go on a land trip. Hiding my disappointment, I said, oh, okay. But then she added, if we're going to go on a cruise, I want to go someplace special. I wouldn't mind going to Alaska. My eyes lit up and the wheels in my head started turning. No Wi-Fi on the plane, but as soon as I got in the Uber, I emailed Sarah for the particulars of the Fire and Ice cruise. She responded that evening, and I went to NCL's website. The rest, as they say, is history. Our Fire and Ice adventure began with a really long day of flights from the East Coast to Honolulu, so I can say that was the least positive aspect of the trip. Well, other than an Uber ride from hell. It would take too long to explain, but let me just say it started with me having to use Apple Maps on my phone to direct the Uber driver to the airport. It got a lot worse.
Believe me, no one will ever believe that experience.
We had a day in Honolulu before boarding NCL Spirit, so we did a city tour and visited Pearl Harbor and the USS Arizona Memorial. What a solemn but informative experience that was. I knew Arizona sank in the attack, entombing over 900 servicemen, but I didn't realize it was situated right below the memorial. In fact, inside the memorial was an opening into the water below, and you could almost touch the hull of the Arizona. I asked the park ranger why the bodies were not recovered. He told me some were, but few could be identified, and a couple of the divers died in the process of trying to recover bodies. He told me the remaining 900 or so were instantly cremated from the force of the blast. On the photo of USS Arizona on my website, thejoyofcruising.net, note the flag at the USS Arizona. It is at half-staff because one of the two remaining survivors of USS Arizona passed away recently, leaving a sole survivor of USS Arizona, Lou Conter, a 102-year-old Californian. The somber tour made me want to learn much more. Since getting home, I've already rewatched Pearl Harbor. Good, but a little too romanticized for me. But my wife didn't mind.
Of course, I enjoyed the romantic portion of the movie. That made the movie complete.
That evening after the visiting the memorial, we dined on some coconut shrimp and poke and picked up some malasadas, Hawaiian beignets stuffed with filling. Our choice was coconut cream for breakfast before we boarded the ship. NCL Spirit is a small ship relative to today's megaships, and with a build date of 1998, it is the oldest ship we have been on. But it appears to be virtually new because right before the COVID lockdown, it had a $100 million boat stern refurbishment. One thing a refurbishment can't change is the size of the cabin and bathroom. Our ocean view cabin was well appointed with better storage than larger cabins I've been in, but it was tight overall, and the bathroom was the smallest I've ever been in.
The size of the bathroom didn't bother me. However, the texture of the toilet paper did. All I can say is that it was definitely not charming.
The only complaint I have about the cabin that NCL could control, of course, other than what Cheryl said, the quality of the toilet paper, was the size of the flat screen TV. It looked to be a 30 or 36 inch. I think they cheaped out on that. At least it showed some of the NBA playoffs, even if I had to sit at the foot of the bed to cheer on my Lakers against Cheryl's Warriors. Our first stop after embarkation was Kona, on the west coast of the Big Island. We didn't purchase any excursions for Kona, as we met up with a family friend, my daughter's college roommate, Benti, and her son.
Benti's not only a friend of the family, but she's my sorority sister. She's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And her son, Kamal, he's just a bundle of joy. He's quite a young little man. He will be 5 years old soon. So this is my first time seeing him in person. I've only communicated to his mother about him via text. So this was quite a joy to see him in person.
Benti, who relocated to Kona several years ago, took us on a brief tour, and then we had lunch at Island Lava Java Kona. Highly recommended if you ever cruise to Kona. You can see the ship from its window. Back on the ship, that evening the entertainment got off to a rousing start with Cameo Rascal, a husband and wife juggling and acrobatics team. The husband did all the amazing things jugglers do, including juggling axes, but the acrobatics and dance with his wife added a unique dimension. Next week, Monday, 5/29, we will have a bonus episode at the Joy of Cruising podcast featuring a conversation with Cameo Rascal. A couple of nights later, we were treated to a similarly amazing husband and wife team called Have Cruise, a magician illusionist act. For this show, we got seats right up front because I wanted to see if I could figure out some of the illusion. They were absolutely spellbinding, and no, I did not come close to figuring anything out. A few years ago, we attended an illusionist show in Vegas that cost us $300, and without hesitation, I can say that this complimentary show on NCL Spirit was much better. I have reached out to Have Cruz about appearing on the Joy of Cruising podcast, so I have my fingers crossed. I would love to bring that conversation to our listeners. Despite the great shows at the beginning of the cruise, we didn't go to all the Spirit shows. Some didn't appeal to us. Others conflicted with the timing of the NBA playoffs. At least that is when they were broadcast. The ship's satellite schedule was unpredictable. You were just as likely to get hockey or rugby. There was only one comedian, Mickey D, who was okay. He did 2 shows, a family-friendly one and an adult-oriented show. We are avid stand-up comedy fans, and I found that kind of paltry compared to cruise lines in the same market segment as NCL, like Royal Caribbean or Carnival. Comedy is a big draw in this segment. I cruised for 7 days on Carnival Mardi Gras last August and got 4 comedians, each of whom did a family show and an adult show. With only 6 kids on Spirit, or so I heard, I think East NCL could have at least done, a family show and 2 or more adult shows featuring different sets, even if it's the same comedian, over 16 days. To finish up on shows on NCL Spirit, the finale on night 15, I believe, was Elements. It was a lighting, sound, costumes, and choreography spectacle, as good as any show I have seen, except of course the aqua shows on Royal Caribbean Oasis class ships, which just due to size of the venues is not really a fair comparison. The focal point of Elements was Javi Cruz, the aforementioned illusionist act, but it by no means was just a redux of their magic show. They were supported by dancers and aerialists that had to be every member of the entertainment staff of NCL. The show was breathtaking. It turns out Elements has been running for several years simultaneously on various NCL ships. So contrary to my initial impression, it was not a show put together for Javi Cruz. Wow, wow, wow.
I agree with Paul. The Elements show was absolutely amazing. It was awesome. Very well put together.
Back to the itinerary. Day 3 of the cruise was Kauai. I hope I'm saying that right. Hawaii's oldest island, which is highlighted by Waimea Canyon, also known as the Grand Canyon in the Pacific. There were so many great photo spots that we were exposed to between Hawaii and Alaska, but I think Waimea Canyon was the most picturesque. It was breathtaking, and I urge you to check out the photos at the website for the Joy of Cruising books, www.thejoyofcruising.net. And then blog.
Yes, this was such a beautiful sight to see. And the pictures, believe me, won't even give it justice. You have to go there to see, to have the appreciation.
Day 4, Spirit stopped in Maui. It's the second largest of the Hawaiian Islands. Normally, the highlight of a stop in Maui is riding the road to Hana. We chose to pass on it as the ship's excursion would cost us over $900. If you visit Maui in the future, you can choose to do a non-ship excursion for less than half that, but our ship didn't port until 10, which was too late for the private tours. Or if you are brave, you can do like my friends Nancy and Dale Houchins did on a previous cruise and save a lot of money. They rented a car and drove the road to Hana themselves. I understand it is not a drive for the faint-hearted, i.e. me, but Dale did it. By the way, Nancy and Dale will be on the podcast in August to discuss their feature in the Joy of Cruising again, living on cruise ships, and I will ask them about their drive of the road to Hana on the show. Instead, along with several other members of the Spirit's Facebook group, we hired a private tour of the island. The well-informed driver, a transplant from Colorado, drove us by Oprah's compound. We went to an operating bee farm and visited a beach with giant Hawaiian turtles, which at first appeared to be giant black rocks in the sand. Check them out at www.thejoyofcruising.net. Day 5 was Hilo, home of the Volcanoes National Park, which has 2 active volcanoes, Kilauea and Mauna Loa. In addition to the main attraction, Kilauea Volcano, a sight to behold, it was fascinating to see dozens of holes in the ground emitting steam, some of which you could walk right up to, with a metal banister to keep you from falling in, and take photos right next to it. Cheryl had me stand by one for a photo. It took a little too long. She didn't realize my back felt like it was being singed. We came to a set of buildings close to the Kilauea volcano. The buildings used to be a part of the tour, but the area was closed off by a chain gate. There was a sign on the gate that read, "Why are these buildings closed?" And then under that question, the sign read, "In 2018, the summit of Kilauea volcano experienced a major eruption that damaged these buildings." That really made me want to check out those buildings. I guess they weren't structurally sound. The next 6 days we were at sea on our way to Alaska, and I suspect I gained about 6 pounds during those 6 days. We had made reservations at each of Spirit's specialty restaurants during the sea days, so let me talk about food on the ship in general. First, the not so good. Spirit's buffet was small and uninspiring, so we rarely ate there. I can understand the small part, but for us, the selections and presentations just weren't exciting. They did have tasty cookies, which was the only item we could stop by for regularly. Anytime.
The staff would always inform us that the cookies would be available at tea time, which was 2:30 p.m. every day. However, my husband would go up after tea time and request cookies, and the staff would sneak in the back and get cookies for him occasionally. Paul didn't understand why they had to sneak to give him the cookies. Just put them out.
Other complimentary choices on the Spirit included the Local, a 24-hour eatery where we typically ate breakfast and occasional lunches and late-night snacks for burgers, Reubens, fish and chips, and the like. We enjoyed it a lot, and the bar at the Local was my go-to. Another complimentary eatery for dinner was Silk, an Asian-inspired spot that we enjoyed a couple of times. And of course, there was the main dining room, where we ate dinner regularly. We also ate lunch there regularly, given the uninspiring buffet. Eating in the main dining room for lunch is something we rarely do, and I have to say I'm glad that was a habit we picked up this cruise. In the main dining room, there was a little placard on each table that says, "Nobody does dining like NCL." The first time I saw that, I thought that was a pretty audacious thing to say on NCL's part. But after many meals there for lunch and dinner, I have to say that it was as good a main dining room as I have experienced, at least post-COVID lockdown. The consensus in the cruise community is that MDRs, main dining rooms across most lines, have suffered lower quality post-lockdown. The only con I had was that conspicuously missing from the main dining room was lobster and my cruise tradition escargot. We tried each of the specialty restaurants. Cagney's Steakhouse was outstanding. I had filet mignon. What did you order, Cheryl?
I had salmon, and it was delicious.
Onda Italian restaurant was pretty good. The almost dinner plate sized piece of veal seemed to be a waste of food. They could have given me half that, and I would have not complained. I looked at the plates of other diners nearby, and in my small sample size, no one ate all of the veal. That's not meant as a complaint so much as an observation. It actually tasted quite good. Teppanyaki is always fun. Our chef said he was half Japanese, half Filipino, a jalapeno. Le Bistro was a French restaurant. It was mostly excellent, but I had an interesting ending to my meal. I like to try new foods on a cruise. That's how I discovered escargot, which, by the way, was my appetizer at Le Bistro. I once tried frog legs for the first time on a cruise, and that was my last time. I decided to try foie gras on my filet, even paid an upcharge for it. Let's just say it's an acquired taste and one I won't be acquiring. I ate it all. Perhaps I was waiting for that aha moment. More probably, I ate it all because I had paid extra for it. While waiting for dessert, I looked up foie gras on Wikipedia, wondering why it was considered such a delicacy. Why did I do that? There's a great deal of controversy regarding force-feeding ducks who fatten them up to produce foie gras, which is duck liver. Oh well, a good meal otherwise, but now I felt like an animal abuser.
I had the lamb, which was very delicious.
All in all, the specialty restaurants on Spirit were about on par with other lines, although well below the best I ever had. Eden and Le Voyage by Daniel Ballard, both on Celebrity Beyond. Back to the itinerary. Day 11 was the first port in Alaska, Icy Strait Point. We did not go on an excursion, choosing instead to ride the free gondola to a great spot where there was a lot of local jewelry and crafts created and sold by the Tinklets, indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast, eateries, and great whale watching. And yes, we got a few photos of whales briefly emerging. Day 12 presented one of the most interesting days of the cruise, and yet we never got off the ship. NCL Spirit visited Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve, comprised of 3.3 million acres and over 1,000 glaciers. A couple of park rangers boarded the ship. Yes, they climbed aboard from their vessel by ladder. They happened to be married to each other. The wife provided ongoing commentary over the PA system from the Spirit's top deck, Spinnaker Observation Lounge, and then her husband provided an informative slideshow in the main theater. It was particularly fascinating to see photos and hear stories of early 20th century visitors to the area. It was also interesting to hear about their upcoming camping and kayaking in the wilderness of the park, armed with lots of bear spray. Nope. Day 13, we stopped in Skagway, a small city in southeast Alaska. As a guest on other podcasts, I've often been asked, what's my favorite excursion? Well, I think I've got a new response. The White Pass and Yukon Route Railroad, also known as the Scenic Railway of the World, where vintage locomotives transit the famously steep route used by prospectors during the gold rush. The scenic vistas were spectacular through the windows of the train, but what was even better are the photos you are able to take by standing on a platform between the railroad cars. I was scared to death of dropping my iPhone, but I got some really nice photos. Of course, they're at www.thejoyofcruising.net.
Well, while Paul was adventurous and getting out of his seat, taking photos, I remained in my seat and observed the beautiful scenery during the 3-hour train ride. At the end of the train ride, we went into the town of Skagway and we feasted on Alaskan fried bread. It was pretty good, which is similar to a pancake-shaped fried donut.
Day 14 was Juneau, the capital of Alaska, one of the best places to see a bald eagle, and we saw several. Our excursion there was the Mendenhall Glacier and Salmon Bank. At Mendenhall Glacier, we walked a couple of trails that allowed us to have up-close views of the glacier and nearby waterfalls. Then we were bused nearby to eat salmon grilled over a wood fire and all the fixings: baked beans, cornbread, potatoes, ribs, clam chowder, blueberry cake, and hot apple cider. A lot of people who visit Juneau go to Tracy's King Crab to have a feast. Unfortunately, we had to pass because we were stuffed after the salmon bake. On day 15, our final stop was at Ketchikan, 90 miles north of British Columbia. We didn't go on an excursion there, choosing to take the free shuttle into town. Very walkable and a very nice day. I saw some folks wearing short sleeves. It was about 60, 65. We chose to go to Annabelle's famous keg and chowder house for some king crab and Dungeness crab. And I'm glad we did because that's where we ran into Camille Rascal. After a sea day, we disembarked in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We had opted for a city tour as we weren't scheduled to board for the long set of flights home until that evening.
Vancouver is such a beautiful city, so rich looking. Oh my goodness, it was just absolutely beautiful.
Well, that was not so much a review per se as our hopefully not too random reflection. I know a lot of us like grades and ratings, so here you go. Itinerary and excursions, 10 out of 10. Cruise ship amenities, activities, shows, 8.5 out of 10. Food, 8.5 out of 10. Overall, 9 out of 10.
You know, the weather was great. In the earlier part of Alaska, the temperatures were in the 40s. We overpacked for the worst. We prepared for the worst, but we really didn't have to bring out the long johns or anything like that. There were no rainy days or anything. So it was just, to me, it was perfect weather versus what I had anticipated.
I would not hesitate to choose the Fire and Ice cruise. And if you're thinking about going to Hawaii, Alaska, or both, I urge you to at least consider it for your bucket list.
I concur.
Thank you for joining us today for this bonus episode. Please join us next week, Monday, 5/29, for our conversation with Cameo Rascal. We'll see you on the ocean.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted can be ordered at the link on the joyofcruisingpodcast.com, each for $16.99 plus shipping. Order the soon-to-be-released The Joy of Cruising Again, also at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com for $18.99. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. Again, the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast. Enter to win a copy of The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted while supplies last at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or both to increase your chance to win. A winner will be announced on each show. Please leave us a review and tell a friend about us. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the brief escape to the ocean. See you next week. Exciting news, passenger cruisers. The Joy of Cruising Again book was just released. Order the ebook at your favorite online retailer. The paperback can be ordered by copying the web address listed at the podcast website, www.thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. Don't forget to use the coupon code Joy of Cruising Podcast to get $4 off. We think you'll enjoy the new book as much as Paul enjoyed writing it, and we would love to hear your comments at the Joy of Cruising Again Facebook page or at the Joy of Cruising Instagram page. Thank you.